Hello, everybody, and welcome to No Violence for Kids Canada. This is a YouTube project to help raise awareness about corporal punishment in Canada, in the US, and all over the world. What we're doing here is we are interviewing Dr. George Holden today, who is a hero of ours. And before we get started, I do want to give a little bit of a land acknowledgement and recognize that I am on the Kwantlen Nation territory here in Surrey, British Columbia. I believe in their truth and I work really hard towards reconciliation. And some of the ways that I do that is I study reconciliation. I work with parents who are working to end violence in their family. And also, I have organized with No Violence for Kids Canada to raise awareness about Call to Action 6 to repeal Section 43 of the Criminal Code of Canada. And in order to do that, we need to have legislators, we need to have researchers, and we need to have Canadians aware. We have the research that shows corporal punishment has zero effect. Zero. What's the word I'm looking for, George?
Positive effects.
Zero positive effects on children. Actually, there's mountains of evidence that show it's harmful. So what we're doing is we are raising awareness, coming together, and working in any way that we can to get people to write their MPs, talk to their senators. And we have two bills on the floor, thankful to Peter Julian from New Westminster, British Columbia, who dropped Bill C-273. And we are also really thankful for Senator Senator Stan Kuchar, who dropped Bill S-251. So we have two bills on the floor that can help answer Call to Action 6. So let's just get started on the conversation because seriously, I am all over the place right now. So we're just going to start talking. And I am super, super excited today because maybe that's why I'm kind of fumbly. I've got mountains of questions to ask Dr. Holden, and I only have 55 minutes. So I'm grateful that he's here with us, and maybe we'll have to do this again. So I'm a little bit nervous, but I think it's because I think this is a really important conversation, and it's one that we need to all talk about more. Dr. George Holden is a professor, a researcher, a psychologist, an author, a husband, a granddad, a puppy daddy. I mean, it's all of the titles that who doesn't want to do all those things? So in my research, in my grad studies, and as well as researching ways to support parents, I've come across Dr. Holden's name over the years. And so to be here today for me is really meaningful. There's a quote that comes out for me here. It is, anyone that helps a child in their life is a hero of mine. And Dr. George Holden is definitely that. And when I talked to a couple people that I was going to be interviewing Dr. Holden, they actually said to me, whoa, he's one of my heroes. So I'm not alone in this idea, George. Your bio goes on for days. I mean, let me just highlight a couple of the highlights. I had to put it over here. Associate Chair of the Department of Psychology at the University of Texas. Former chair of the Department of Psychology at the Southern Methodist University, co-founded the U.S. Alliance to End Hitting of Children, and you're their president. And also, I'm one of your ambassadors for that now. Anybody can be an ambassador. Go to endhitting.org, and you can go to and see all of this mine of resource. George also served as president on the board of the Family Compass, a Dallas child abuse prevention nonprofit. On the board of Nurturings, formerly Attachment Parenting International. You still doing that work, George?
Yep.
Wow. Former president of the Society for Research in Human Development. Wow. So as a mediator, a parent interventionist who's been working with parents for over 20 years, I've done over 4,500 intervention sessions with parents in my career. Talking to George today is a big deal. So George, thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure. I'm delighted to be with you.
Such an honor. So tell me, how did you start working in the world of corporal punishment? Because, I mean, it's quite a topic.
Well, it actually, I look back to the beginnings, and it started for me in high school when I was sort of on an internship at a daycare center, and looking at the parent-child interactions And it really came home to me how important and how different varied parents were with their kids, and how important that was, obviously, for the children's development.
Mhm.
So I kind of back then I decided I wanted to be a psychologist and study parenting. And then so I majored in psychology in college, and then went on to get a PhD in developmental psychology, and then started my own research program in parenting. So it even though I didn't initially want to plan to focus on corporal punishment, after a couple of years of doing some different studies, I kind of settled on this topic as being one of my major focuses of my research, because I recognized how important it was, and B, how little we knew about it, and C, it was clear that it was early on. It was obvious to me it's a very problematic parenting practice, and so I wanted to study it, understand why some parents use it, others don't, and then that would help me understand how to try to get parents to change their behavior. So for all those reasons, I settled on corporal punishment and have done, I don't even know, dozens of studies on the topic at this
Dozens, for sure, I think.
point.
Incredible studies too, fascinating work. And I'm so grateful for your work, because we actually, just hearing you there, we have a very similar trajectory, yet I have not gone that far by all means. I'm stuck in the clinician part and grad school part. But at the same time, it sounds like we really have this common ground, recognizing, like, what came up for me when you said that was how common corporal punishment actually is. And when you see and you work intimately with families, and you start recognizing that sometimes I think that parents don't recognize they're actually doing that, and so I'm fascinated about the fact that you also working in a daycare, working with parents, and you ended up on this topic. Me too. I get that. Like, it's almost my cornerstone thought. Like, it's everything I think about is the violence, the levels of violence that parents are using.
Yeah.
In
Well,
your Yeah, go ahead.
Punishment and physical punishment often occurs automatically in many parents. So they don't, as you mentioned, they don't really realize that they're doing it. And they also dramatically underreport how often they're doing it. Virtually almost, probably 99% of the research on corporal punishment, which now amounts to thousands of studies, almost 99% is self-report. Parents are asked, how often do you spank? Using rating scales or some other similar kind of questionnaire response. And it has not provided very accurate data, because parents, for lots of different reasons, underreport. They are unaware of their behavior. They know it's not socially desirable, etc. So one of the more interesting studies that I've done was actually audio recording mothers at home. And in that process I was actually looking at another undesirable behavior, that is yelling at kids. But in the process of doing that study, we found that some of these moms were hitting their children. So we could look at the context of the hitting, and we could look at things like, did it correct the child's behavior? How did the child react? What elicited the hitting? And things like that in a real natural context, because ongoing behavior that we had, even though we didn't have the video of it, we had the audio of it.
Mm-hmm.
So that yielded some fascinating results that published several years ago. And one of the findings was that mothers were greatly underreporting how frequently that they were engaging in spanking among those who were spanking.
That's so fascinating.
Yeah, one mother averaged 18 times a week spanking her kid. That was among the most. But imagine how that can impact a child. And particularly now, a new area of research, the brain development of children being corporally punished.
Well, and
So
it's interesting. And you wonder like how much that mom realized, so after that study, did you have a chance to kind of support that parent? So what happens then?
yeah, I would have loved to subsequently interview parents and discuss with them some of our findings. We actually didn't do that.
Oh, okay.
Um, so don't know to what extent she was aware of how violent her behavior
Yeah.
for the
Yeah.
child.
And
As I say, many parents do some of these things automatically. They lash out. They're not really aware of their behavior, and they don't reflect on it. And so one of my big sticks about arguments about parenting is effective parents really need to be more reflective and aware of their own parenting and think about things like anticipate and problem solve and reflect and monitor their children. So to me, what effective parenting really involves is a lot of cognitive activity. And that amount of activity it's hard work for sure. But to be really, I think, ideally a good parent, you really need to engage in that kind of thing because parenting is so challenging. It's such a difficult task that most of us were totally unprepared for. So the more we can get information, we can rely on professionals like you to help us, guide us through the process of dealing with problems that all parents have to deal with. All problems, every child exhibits some issues that parents need to figure out how to manage, and the ways that we can do it non-violently. There's many different ways, but unfortunately, partly because of our own experiences, many parents just rely on a physical response, negative physical response, like punishment and hitting.
You're bringing up some really important points, and I just want to stop you there because I just want to go back a little bit when you said that it's so parents don't really know, what they're doing, and it's similar to kids, right? Like we just behave in reaction situations under stress, so we're not responsive in those situations. We're reactive. It's autopilot for everyone in those situations. And so I like where you're going there, and I do see a lot of parents do really well when we take perspective taking is a big deal. And it's also really important that they do that outside of the family dynamic, outside of the family environment, to really talk about like, what do you think is happening for you in that moment? Or what other thoughts might have come up? If you had the moment to sit back, let's kind of look at this from a big picture. How could that have played out differently? And also, what is little Johnny's experience there? What might he be thinking in his head during that interaction? What do you notice about his face, right? During those kind of interactions, do his eyebrows move, his shoulders go up? Tell me more about his body behavior. Also, what do you notice about your body behavior during those times? Let's role play. And I love that idea, about role playing, because then, I actually love it because I like being theatrical. I won't lie. It's super fun to play a really, really fun child who's pissed at their parents. So that's fun. And it's also fun to be authoritarian or really permissive. So those are usually kind of the three roles that I play on. And I also like to play the parent bully who bullies the parent from their own language. They give me lots of language, and then maybe a couple sessions later, I'll throw it back at them, right? As an adult in the mall somewhere, and they'll be like, "Oh my God, that was such a jerky thing," and I'm like, "Oh, well, hold on." So role play, perspective taking, interoception. Like, what is your gut saying? How are you listening to your body in that moment? What does your body come alive? And how do you know? Like practicing the listening is so, like, parents come back from those kind of conversations and they have such unique ways of hearing and listening to themselves that is so much full of compassion. And they're also raise their observation, which is fascinating, on their children. Instead of the behavior now, they're actually looking at a whole being who's alive, whose body's moving, who's also present and has ideas and thoughts. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And that interoception that is so important. What I want to go here is that what I'm talking about is intervention, right? These parents have, children that are on a level of diagnostics. They might be on medication, mild to, there's conduct disorders, there's aggression, there's these kind of things going on. Schools complaining, right? So it's an intervention. This is not a situation for everyday parenting. I mean, it could be. I would love to, do that work with everyday parents, but this is intervention work. When I'm thinking about intervention, this is kind of where I'm going, and I can't stop thinking about in talking to you, because the program is rare, right? This isn't something that's available for parents to just call up, have a free service. Hey, can I get a session tomorrow? Right? The wait list is almost a year, I think, with hundreds of families.
Wow.
The clinicians are, there's more coming on board, but it's not common to find clinicians that are very focused on this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And what are your thoughts about what can we do to get this kind of thing out to families?
Well, I mean, you're right that there's an incredible need out there, and particularly in the wake of COVID, with all the stresses that's added to families, and the insulation that caused, and the additional problems that families have experienced. There is a tremendous need for these kinds of advice and services and consultation. I don't have any brilliant ideas about how to. I mean, the question is, how do we mass market? How do we get it?
Yeah.
And the problem is, so much of it really has to be done individually.
So true.
One to one. And that's what we found in terms of talking with parents, getting them to move away from corporal punishment. It's one thing to provide them with bits of information, but really to get attitude change, you really need to talk with them. You need to help thinking, modify their thinking about it. And I don't know how one can do that at a mass level.
That's my question, really, is because, like I said, working one-on-one with parents, there's no two answers that have been the same. And it's really not true. Like, people say, oh, your job's so repetitive. And it's not all about parents. We're not talking about violence, directly in our calls. We're definitely not. We're talking about routine times. We're talking about, but these are the things that lead to violence, these conflict situations. And honestly, what they come back and what helps them grow is so unique. How they're pacing, their parenting, a thought about something when they were a child, their shoulders, a smell, like it's something that sends them off on their journey of just doing better. And it's so unique. So it's like, that's my kind of question, is how do we mass market an experience that is so intimate and so challenging and personal and so brave, so very brave.
I mean, back to your point about, the importance of perspective taking. I think a very easy thing for parents to keep in mind is, what perspective are you taking? Are you taking, most parents just take their own perspective, but think about taking the child's perspective. And what is a child thinking? What's going on through their mind? For instance, if you're spanking them, parents think, oh, my child has stopped the behavior that I didn't want the child to do. It must be effective. But if they take the child's perspective, how is my child feeling when I am hitting my child? Then it's a totally different answer. So, I mean, just getting that notion out, parent perspective versus child perspective, I think can be a valuable message that could be mass marketed, but that typically parents don't think about. They think about parenting issues from their own perspective, which it's only natural that we do that. So the more we can keep in mind the child's perspective, the better parent will be.
100%, George. I love it. And it's really important, because when parents do take the child, it's such an aha moment, and it's a breakdown moment often. Like, it's a breakdown moment because they recognize how bad they've been so caught up in their own minds. And they're usually telling little Johnny too, you only think about yourself. It's not just about you, you know, it's that and more. It's funny.
Yeah.
But I think that's a great idea. It's really taking that perspective taking. And also that can be helpful when we think about children's rights, right? They have a right to be involved in decisions that affect them. They have a right to be safe.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is a big, I think that's something that would be more simple to kind of take that perspective without getting, because I guess that's a challenge too, as in your research, is how do we do better with bringing children into this conversation? You know, did you do any studies with children directly? And
I have done, yes, about corporal punishment. And I did one of the first ones, and there's been others since, and there's even been some books about children's perspective regarding corporal punishment. And in contrast to what parents might think, children do not like being hit.
What?
They're effective. They often resent, feel anger to their parent who's hitting them, as you might expect. So if more parents thought about it and were aware of this kind of information, what are children saying about being hit? I think that would help to change their views about corporal punishment as well.
100%. What a surprising research that children don't like being hit, George. And, you know, I think, yeah, it'd be interesting to find out how much adults like to be hit too, you know, to be fair.
About the same rate as children, I would.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Tell me a little bit more about your research, or how about your textbook? So what is dynamic parenting, George? Can you describe more about that?
Sure. I mean, a very simple idea, and that is, in contrast to when I started doing research, parents were, this was many years ago, decades ago, but parents were sort of classified as these static entities, like permissive or authoritarian or authoritative, Baumrine's famous typology of parenting. But there was little more thought about what's going into parenting besides these sort of static entities about how they would react. And when I started doing research with parents, I would pose, you know, questions about, so suppose your child did X, Y, or Z, how would you respond? And I'm thinking the authoritarian parent would always say the same thing. The authoritative would respond the same way, etc. And almost all the parents invariably said, well, it depends. It depends on the situation. It depends on how the child's been. It depends on prior incidents, and etc. So that led me to recognize this incredible cognitive activity that goes on in parenting, and that parenting is much more dynamic, changeable, modifiable than people had been thinking about in the past. So kind of that's the major theme of my textbook, that there is this, it's a very active, malleable, changeable type of activity that parents engage in.
And that's in contrast to a lot of traditions. So, you know, thinking about how many parents come to me and they talk about, I'll say, you know, what are some of your goals around parenting? A lot of times I think consistency, right? I need consistency. It needs to be the same. And then also what's really important is recognizing, actually one of my notes at the very top, I have the words, it depends. Because when I ask parents, you know, the question on, how well does little Johnny follow your direction? I would say 75% will start with, well, it depends. And then there's this whole like context of like every little detail. And it really tells me about how parents are the expert in their children. They know their kids so well that they could go on for hours and hours about it depends.
Yeah.
All the context that I don't know, nobody else knows, that it depends factors. Yeah. So you're thinking about this dynamic parenting. What I'm getting from it is there's this shift towards being flexible, towards recognizing context in the moment, which ties into a lot of what I'm understanding around the skills of cooperation. So like following direction, following rules, sharing, taking turns, accepting no. Those skills are really, really difficult to teach because they're so highly contextual. So it depends how well Johnny will share that day. And it depends how well he will manage disappointment that day. So in order, the parents, if they're very strict and rigid, then it depends doesn't go over well. Their expectations turn really high, and it's more likely, I find, that they might be more authoritarian. Am I on track with the flexibility and recognizing when we understand context in the moment and being able to move and have a toolbox of strategies?
Right.
Is that what?
Yeah. And it's kind of, it raises the question of what is kind of the parenting philosophy that's guiding and what the research is increasingly highlighting is the fact that what's important in developing healthy human beings, in healthy, loving, cooperative, respectful human beings, is focusing on good quality relationships. And if that's your number one goal, then your kids are going to develop well. If you have more of a goal of my child has to obey me because I am the boss, kind of a rigid authoritarian approach, then that often doesn't work so well. It backfires because the primary goal is not to have a positive relationship, but it's to have the child obey at all costs. And sometimes, children do not have the cognitive brain power to obey and control themselves when they're very young. They just have not yet developed the frontal cortex connections to be able to regulate, self-regulate. And that comes with time. But you don't want to damage that developmental process by, being harsh or being overly strict or punitive, because that will not promote this good quality relationship that parents really need to have as their number one orientation and goal.
So what I'm getting from you there is it's the relationship that helps the brain thrive.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Can you connect that to a little bit more of your research? So how do you know that, George? How do we know the relationship makes brains thrive?
Yeah, I've not. That's more from my textbook, from reading other research, because I have not gone into.
It comes up like Stephen Porges' work, right? And recognizing, where he goes with fight, flight, freeze. So the survival mode that happens when we are under threat, when we sense coercion, when we sense being unsafe, then our brain kind of goes back. And that, from what I'm understanding, and Stephen Porges' work is, if anybody wants to check it out, it's very difficult to read. It's literally neuroscience and wow. But from what I'm understanding, and I think there's some like common stuff that's happening and accepted, is that under threat, we focus on fight, flight, and freeze. And when we do that, that can become habitual. Those neural pathways really get strong, they get grounded in. And so the separates, right? We're alone, we have to save ourselves. So when we attack a child, when we're coercive with a child, when we don't put the relationship first, when we're focused on ourselves, when we're, harsh parenting, or even passive, I think can do the same sort of thing. And that removes, so we become alone. We isolate to be saved. So that's interesting. I think when you're talking about being coercive, when kids are so young and they aren't ready to make those decisions. And I would argue too, like, I just want to say, a Celebrity Kid keeps reminding me he's an influencer, but an incredible advocate for kids. That kids' brains are fully developed at the age they're supposed to be at. This language, right, that they're not developed enough, that they're not, is so almost childish in a way, like a childism in a way, right? So recognizing they are whole beings where they're at right now, and they have the capacity to speak up for themselves.
Yeah. But again, the parent who has a perspective of my child should be like an adult, they should behave like me. When I say no, they should listen. When I say no cookies now, they need to obey that. So they're thinking that the child has the same cognitive abilities that they do.
Right.
And of course they don't.
It's different.
Yeah.
It's different.
Yeah.
And it's whole. I think that's an important distinction to
Yes.
make,
Yeah.
because if we think of any less than whole, then we remove their opportunities to be wholly present.
Yeah, I think that's a nice point. Yeah.
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 Yeah, it's interesting. And I'm really loving Emma Catt's work on coercion and, you know, framing the idea that when there is domestic violence, that children aren't just witnesses to that. You know, they are having a full experience. And there's that conversation again that children have a right to be wholly in their environment, that they're not just experiencing their parents' life, you know, that they are there. So I'm kind of going on a rant here, but my head's kind of there a lot lately. Let's discuss culture. In one of the last conversations I want to have with you, because it's come up a few times, I know it's important in Canada right now when we're looking at the 2 bills we have on the floor right now, George, 2, so exciting. Culture is coming up a lot. In fact, this week in Canada, there was a news article that came out, George, and this is what happened. A gentleman immigrated to Canada from another faraway land. And when he got here, he was charged with I think it was child violence, family violence, for beating his kids with a wooden spoon and other objects. I'm going to imagine that this is great that this found out. The family was separated somehow. He hired a lawyer. He was charged, and in order to defend himself, the argument for the lawyer was that this is a different culture. Of course, he feels bad for what he did. He wants to reunite with his family, but it's a different culture. What is the thoughts that come up first when you hear something like that?
Well, I certainly have heard that a lot from different types of cultures. There's different pockets of the population in the United States where there's much higher rates of corporal punishment, for instance. But basically, I disagree with any kind of culturalism argument for lots of different reasons. Any child reacts the same way to being hit, whatever culture they come from. They react negatively, and it's not healthy, and they react physiologically and neurologically in negative ways. So for the child's well-being, there's no any kind of cultural okayness about being hit. Another argument is now at this time, 65 countries around the world have banned all physical punishment of children. And so, you know, that's an indication that there's many different cultures out there that have recognized this is not a good or necessary parenting practice. Let's see, and you know, there's another reason I think that's very important is children's rights, and this is something that in the United States most people don't think about, but certainly children have a right, just like any individual has a right not to be hit. And so these kind of reasons, I think, transcend any kind of cultural argument. You can look back at some of these cultural arguments to see where they come from. For instance, there are some African Americans who believe that they need to hit their children, but scholars have said this comes from slavery. And if you look far enough back into Africa, for instance, the Africans were not hitting their children. So this is something that came from the slavery tradition in the United States, hitting and the use of corporal punishment. So, and similarly, in some conservative Protestants believe the Bible tells them to hit their children. And that, again, is limited to basically some proverbs from one book of the Bible, authored by one individual and not a particularly healthy individual. And there's many counter arguments to that. Certainly, you know, the biggest counter argument would be look at the New Testament and Jesus's behavior. So he would certainly never hit a child. But some people, cling to these one or two ideas. There's few proverbs, or it's my right to hit a child, and these are just, I think, vacuous arguments that do not hold much water.
Wow. I'm so glad I asked. I'm so glad I asked that question. I was just like, okay. So to summarize this very important question, what I'm hearing is that I like the word you kind of use, culturism. I never thought about it that way. Is that what I heard? And recognizing that it doesn't matter where we are on this planet, humans don't like to be hit. Yeah. Point blank. It doesn't matter if you are from probably other planets, actually. It doesn't matter if you are what species you are. Trees don't like to be hit. Children, animals, nobody. Hitting is just bad.
Yeah.
The cultural argument is out of the water for that. Then what I'm hearing you say, that children have rights. And in the US, in Canada, I would argue in Australia, probably Britain, any kind of country that's under the British Empire, let's say, we're not talking about rights enough. I think the Global South actually is doing a better job at this conversation than we are. And which is great that they're, leading the way, because we definitely have been overpowering them in many ways. So children have rights, and they also need to be taught their rights. And I think it's almost a parent responsibility to ensure kids know their rights, instead of blindly kind of not know their rights and not talk about that. But okay, so there's that. Then I'm hearing you say, which is, I think, a really important point, is kind of tying in. And when you were talking there, I was thinking of Dr. Stacey Patton.
Yeah.
Oh, and the research that she does, and her voice. And by the way, she's going to be speaking with Angela Davis coming up. I'm just putting that up.
Great.
I know, like mind-blowing talk. So Dr. Stacey Patton and her work around recognizing and going back to the traces of whooping kids, right? And how it leads back to racism and slavery, and that those families that might be, under the umbrella of like Black families, so that are hitting kids, she's like, they're assimilated, right? We are not naturally violent people, is what she's saying. And so then the same thing up here when we think about Indigenous families and colonization, this whole idea that, hold on, violence didn't start, just, when we humans, it's not natural, right? This is a way of supremacy. This is cultural supremacy. This is racism. This is misogyny. These are all the things that create oppression in society.
Yeah. So anthropologists talk about, in the hunter-gatherer thousands of years that we were hunter-gatherers, there was no evidence of any kind of corporal punishment that went on. So it was a newer cultural invention, if you will, that was created.
Absolutely. And I think it goes back to the Enlightenment days. I know I'm a little bit of a fan of Michael Foucault and his philosophy, and he talked about how once this kind of pastoral power started taking over in society, they started recognizing that people that weren't productive, were not giving back to society, or people that were a little off and not able to, the ship of fools, they shipped them away, punish them, and that's kind of just incredible to see that kind of seed, and how those philosophies are still woven throughout, I think, Europe and Eurocentric countries.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Interesting. I'm glad I asked about the culture question so much. Can you help me vision a program? The wide reach, we talked about it already, but I think that's kind of where we need to go when we think about a remedy. What is the wide reach? So you were talking about the perspective taking. We can do something like that. What other ideas that you have?
Well, in the area of corporal punishment, we need to get more information out there. There's lots of information that has been investigated, that's been published. It's good, very strong research, but we need to get it out to the masses, that there are all these different types of problems that are linked to corporal punishment. And it's really not the way to parent a child. That positive parenting, that sort of somewhat ambiguous term, is a much better approach to do. So we need to educate parents about that positive parenting techniques, so they have the tools to deal with the problems, and they can, sort of figure out on their own using that set of tools, the positive parenting set of tools, how to deal with the particular issues that they're going through, but dealing with it in a positive way that's promoting the relationship and avoiding some of the harsh physical techniques that have been so prevalent in the past. Some parents, one piece of research that really surprised me was how early some parents are hitting their infants. And there's some evidence that like 15% of parents of 3-month-olds are slapping and spanking their infants for misbehaving. And, it's just a total misattribution, total misunderstanding of children's behavior. And they need much more knowledge about child development. They need knowledge about ways of dealing with crying babies and things like that would have been resulting in them lashing out at the child in such damaging ways.
So what I'm hearing there is really parents need to lean towards positive parenting practices. And yes, it's very vague, George. There's lots of information out there, and some of it is a little bit not so good either, right? But so it's better. I'd rather parents go there. But so positive parenting is wonderful. We know that it's better than negative parenting. They need information that's evidence-based. We need to get the evidence and the research out there. Yeah. 100%. And how I like what you said too, is they need to see the variety of ways that corporal punishment actually has an effect, right? The intersectionality of this problem of early childhood violence on our society is really, really massive. So parents need to see that. Society needs to see that. We need to out the impact of corporal punishment almost. Then I'm hearing you say, parents need to know that there's different strategies and skills for different scenarios and settings of parenting, right? That it's normal that they're going to feel frustrated and angry and all of these beautiful feelings, right? That's normal. And we need to have strategies to take that responsibility with our behavior and show compassion for ourselves. Then there's, we have to work to get this information out to parents in a way that's digestible because they're busy, right? Parents don't like, it's interesting that they have a lot of time to punish, but when I ask, how much time are you spending in a neutral time talking about the preferred behaviors you'd like to see, and how much time are you actually encouraging when your kids do that? Oh, well, we don't have time for that. So parents are busy and under stress. So I think we need to figure out a time to package all of this, a way to package all of this.
Yeah.
So we need to get the law out of the way first. It needs to be illegal to hit kids so that the federal government can help us package this.
Yeah, on the one hand, I don't like the idea of having a lot of laws that are constricting all behavior, et cetera. But on the other hand, by passing a law, it's a way to get people aware of the problem of corporal punishment. And if a law is passed that says you may not do this because it's damaging to the child, then that brings a lot more attention to it than all the efforts that we've been doing in the U.S. Alliance to End the Hitting of Children, which often, there's still so many people who just haven't heard about any of the research about corporal punishment. And that's one of the great benefits of passing a law. It brings attention and can provoke attitude and behavior change.
100%. When laws change, it does change discourse and thoughts, and it shifts public knowledge and behavior for sure. I agree. When the law is changed, and I think it was Valerie Michelson that said that beautiful quote, and I can't remember the quote, but I do remember she said 2 words in a quote. It was something like, when we repeal Section 43, this is a symbolic measure that puts kids first. And it's a substantive measure that opens up opportunities to put kids first. So it's symbolic and it's substantive. That word's hard for me to say. Yeah. So my final question to you, George, is it possible to parent without force?
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, a parent needs to be firm, but not use for force. So a parent certainly can be firm. A parent can certainly express their viewpoints and their raise children in the way they think they should be raised within reason, but without using force, just by using love and using reasoning, and looking out for what's right for the child, keeping in mind what does the child need and what is in the child's best interests, and using those as guiding principles rather than ever having to rely on force. I think certainly will make for a much better family life and for parenting, and a healthier child to develop into a healthy, loving adult.
Thank you, George. And society.
In society.
Exactly. Uh-huh. So it is possible to parent without force. Assertive parenting is okay. Authoritarian parenting is scary. Permissive parenting is also scary.
Yeah.
So the idea is to be a dynamic parent, to find your place in the middle of that. That struggle is real.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I see, is to be dynamic, is to be flexible and firm and assertive, and trust your gut and your heart, and just love your kids and work best on that relationship in that messy middle. Is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely. And sometimes, reach out to professionals like Danielle for help when you're facing problems you can't solve. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. My wife and I had to do that with one of our children who we couldn't figure out how to best deal with, who's now a loving, wonderful adult, and a wonderful parent himself. But
Granddad George.
We certainly had challenges dealing with him, and we turned to a professional to get help. So, parents need to look at all kinds of resources online, professionals, and carefully evaluate it.
Yeah. And just even thinking about that, I love that idea of recognizing that we do need help. Every parent asking for help isn't a bad thing. In fact, resourcing yourself with whatever. But I think what's really important is find the books, find the help, ask your friends, talk about it. And also that I think every parent's unique. And that's what makes parenting so beautiful. Mm-hmm. Your journey is unique. Your kids are unique. Your relationship is unique. So understanding that when you have all this information coming at you, it can be really confusing. And it's hard to weed through, like, what is right? Is that the right thing to do? What's that, And I think, George, do you agree with me that the research actually shows that what's right is what's right for the parent, what's right for the child in those perspectives, and how to form the relationship after all? It's not about doing some strategy or, doing the right thing. It's about finding what's right for you.
Yeah, well, there's no research per se that I could point to to support that, but I do agree with you, and it's a wise orientation.
Yeah, that's what I find too. Like, there's no actual research that talks about, like, the parent gut, the parent guide, like that center that feels, right in the moment. And kind. I think that's the big piece is, parents always, what is a good parent? And the first word that comes to mind is be kind.
Be kind and be attentive. I mean, there's dozens of adjectives we could use. Another concept we haven't introduced here in this discussion that I think is important is parents guiding children on positive trajectories. So parents, I think, have an important role to play in how children develop through this guiding notion, and to monitor the child. If the child gets off track, if the child starts to have problems for whatever reason, perhaps it's peer problems, or some kind of issue, then it's parents' duties to get the child back on track through whatever technique they need, whether their own parenting or getting professional help, advice from friends. So keeping in mind how parents are guiding their children, I think is a useful concept too.
That's a really, I'm glad you brought that up today, because I think one of the traps I see often is parents interrupt misbehavior and they do their teaching in those moments. When there's high stress, don't jump on the couch, Johnny, stop, don't do that, and the intervention is during a high stress time. And from my understanding, without being a researcher, is that actually the brain is quite closed when they're high stress, right? They're not really listening. They're hearing the intensity. And so they repeat the behavior over and over again. So it's helpful for parents to use guidance and recognize, whoa, that's been jumping on the couch situation keeps coming up. What do I want to see instead? Oh, safe in the living room or feet on the floor, whatever it is. And then recognize that they have an opportunity to teach that at a neutral time, recognize it when it is happening. So start shaping that new behavior through specific and kind encouragement and teaching.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Such an important point. Guidance and monitoring. That word monitoring comes up a lot in my study, and it's one that when I mention to parents, they're like, "Huh?" It's funny when we think about monitoring, but basically, a way that I like to connect monitoring, George, is the idea of you're measuring the how responsible and how able they are every moment being a parent, right? This is that instinctual kind of guidance that you're watching over them, but you're doing that in order to offer freedom. It's that exchange between responsibility and freedom. And it can be really stressful, and heartbreaking, the first day of kindergarten, that letting go, right? Are they ready? And it's that are they ready moment. And I think it's a great way to talk about monitoring.
And how are they reacting to that new situation? They need, extra love and TLC because it's so stressful for them. Do they have some, negative interactions with peers that they need help with and things like that? So it's very important to monitor, particularly these transitions like that.
Totally. So important. So important. It's a wonderful conversation. Once we kind of have an understanding of what it means, then it's like, wow, actually, that's like all my stress. Like it's a lot of the parent stress is trying to measure all of that letting go and giving, and are they ready and not? But once they have language, I think that's a big piece with parents, is giving them language to all of the knowledge that they do have, the expertise that they do have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. I'm so grateful for you being here today, George. Do you have any final thoughts about our conversation or anything else that you think?
It's been fun. I could spend hours talking with you.
Isn't it fun? That's so exciting when you find your people.
Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for being here, George. And for everyone out there, thank you so much for watching this video. It's really important to both George and I think a lot of people, that we start talking more about corporal punishment openly. We start talking about how normal it is to feel stress as a parent. And we start advocating for more access to information, to tools and strategies. And we come together with a ton of compassion, but always, always from the child's perspective. We need to bring that into the picture. Please, if you are interested in staying in touch with this channel, do like this video, subscribe. I think it's weird for me to say that because I'm not really here trying to be a YouTuber. But please do follow along. And also please go to No Violence for Kids Canada on Facebook. We're a growing team behind the scenes there. And what we're starting to do is help people write letters. And so we have templates for you to write your MP to help change laws around corporal punishment, or any topic that matters to you. And you could write your MP about, the trees in your park, whatever it is. We have a template that can get your letter to an MP, to a senator. We're starting to work with people to write op-eds. We really do believe in the mighty pen. And at No Violence for Kids Canada, we're also posting a lot of good information about parents. And I just want to put it out there to go to Google Scholar, read George's work. So Dr. George Harrison. And if you're interested in any parenting knowledge, I do recommend Mona Delahute's work right now. I do also recommend right now Gabor Mate's book, The Myth of Normal, has got some really good and supportive, compassionate understanding about our systems. And also, I just recommend looking at your local community mental health organization and reaching out to any support at all. There is strategies to help us change and break our cycles of violence. And it does take courage to do so. So I also want to put out that to all you parents that are out there doing that really important work, we are thinking about you. It is hard. And every time you practice change, it makes a difference. So thank you for being here, everyone. And this has been a great conversation, and I look forward to next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.